Millions of frontline workers keep our economy running and are provided with the latest technology to do their jobs. But digital adoption, especially by frontline workers, is really hard.
This is Frontline Innovators. We explore how to overcome challenges and achieve success when we empower our essential workers.
I'm Justin Lake.
And I'm Euegene Signorini. Together, we speak with experts who are leading the way and driving digital transformation to the front line.
This podcast is sponsored by Skillful, on a mission to help frontline workers learn and use the technology needed to succeed in their jobs.
I'm your host, Euegene Signorini, and as always, I'm excited about our show. Our guest today is an industry thought leader and highly skilled strategist who's an innovator in digital AI, machine learning, chatbots, and mobile apps. He's currently CEO at Unvired Inc. Please welcome to the program, Alok Pant. Alok, thanks for joining us today.
Gene, thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to our conversation.
I'm excited as well. Alok, we always like to kind of kick off the program with kind of our big question. A lot's happening, obviously, these days when it comes to technology, particularly when it comes to the frontline workforce. What I'd love to get your take on is, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing the deskless workforce today?
All right, so there's a couple of challenges, and let me try to talk to some of the more prominent ones. So I think the biggest challenge that we are finding is that the enterprises today are focusing a lot on the whole customer experience, and that translates into employee experience, right? So you have the field worker there, and especially with COVID and the paper and the lack of paper now, everything is being pushed to digital and mobile. So I think that's what's driving everything then, the whole digitalization of business processes. And how do you enable the field service worker to do their work even more productively anytime, while at the same time maintaining safety, compliance, and again, customer experience. People want to deliver a delightful customer experience, right? So especially coming from Amazon, the whole customer obsession. So that's what we are finding, is that enterprises want their field service workers to be empowered at the point of delivery to deliver, excellent customer service and that experience.
Now, Alok, I agree. I mean, we've certainly seen that as well. Was this a trend? I mean, how much do you think it has been accelerated because of COVID and the pandemic? Was this a trend we were kind of seeing beforehand, and now it's just kind of come to the forefront even more so?
Yes. So the trend was there. But what we've seen in the last 2 years, especially the last 12 months, as people have begun to figure out COVID, and now it's like, okay, now we need to counter it and take advantage of whatever opportunity there is that COVID is giving us in terms of business processes. Clearly, an acceleration. So what we are finding is that people, we're getting different use cases. People want to do digital customer experience, whether it's employee, even partner experience. So yes, there has been an acceleration. We are finding more customer inquiries and even RFPs from the web. So the short answer is yes.
And what sort of, so, you talk about that acceleration, right? What are the challenges that has on the frontline workforce itself?
Yeah, so I think we see 4 or 5 challenges. The first one is really about making sure that the field service worker is able to do their work effectively. What does that really mean? So as you know, that the field service worker, typically there's a high turnover, right? People are joining in and out, and also and these people are sometimes not very skilled at using different technologies. So I think the first thing is, how do you make the field service worker effective, right? How do you train them? So that's one. On the employee front, also equally important is that whole user adoption, change management. Yes, you have a great mobile app and you're rolling it out at scale, right, to thousands of users. It could be a beverage company, right? It could be, for example, direct store delivery, right? And mobilizing that process. So how do you get these people trained upfront? And then, as you know, processes change, applications are enhanced, right, frequently. How do you keep the field service worker, the existing ones, the current ones, trained on the new features, and also while at the same time bringing in, onboarding the people who are constantly coming in, given the churn? So I think we see the user adoption as a big challenge. And then user adoption Within user adoption is that whole area of change management, right? So how do you, and the training, right? And how do you train these field service workers? So lastly, the other challenge is how do you deploy these apps? Yes, the apps have been developed and companies are, trying to see, is the best way a public store? Is it a private store? Do I use a mobile device management solution? So how do I deploy? How do I distribute my apps, right? So you can develop them, but then how do you distribute them? And how do I train my employees and manage that whole change?
Yeah, that's great. Obviously, we see a lot of that because that's what we do at Skillful. So we're kind of very tapped into that. A question I have for you on that is, how aware do you think your customers are when it comes to that part of the challenge, right? I think so many, from my perspective, is so many companies are focused on, identifying the transformation opportunities, right? Selecting the technology, going through that they seem to overlook some of the challenges around change management and user adoption. Is that changing now? Are companies becoming more aware, or is it something that you still kind of need to kind of say, hey guys, don't forget this part of the equation?
So I think I would grade it 5 out of 10.
Okay.
So what we have found previously is that, especially with our some of our earlier customers, change management wasn't on top of the mind. Yeah, it was more user training, and it was like, hey, can you give me documentation? Will we get videos and all that, right? So a little simpler approach to training, but effective. But lately, we are finding, especially in the RFPs that we get, there is inevitably a section on OCM, organizational change management. They want us to address how we will address that. Do we understand the importance of OCM and how does that fit in the overall project management plan? So clearly we are finding that requirement. So yes, customers are recognizing the change management need, but it's typically we find in larger deals, RFPs. If it's a smaller application, customers are sometimes not fully aware. And what we like to do is we will sit up front with the customer and tell them, listen, we want you to be successful, but please understand that just having the app is not enough, right? We have to make sure that your employees are trained on the app, right? And perhaps there is a better way than just videos and documentation. And maybe you need to look at a training platform. So we like to educate our customers because ultimately, if only if they are successful, will we be successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, right? Is that in some cases it's becoming in the purview of the vendor really to educate customers on the importance of that, because just like you said, right, if they're not going to be successful, you're not going to be successful, right? If they don't think about things like change management and adoption, then your solution, right, that you're helping to bring to the table is just going to fail, right? And it's bad for everyone. I think this is actually a great segue here. It probably would benefit folks in our audience to learn a little bit more about Unvired and your role and what the company does and who you guys serve and help. So talk a little bit about Unvired.
Sure. So Unwired is a Houston headquartered company. Our customers are mainly in the US and Canada. We also have customers in Europe, Australia, New Zealand. So pretty global customer base. What do? We focus on doing 3 or 4 things within the digital space. So we do the the mobile apps and the web apps, right, which is kind of laying the foundation for digital. And then we add layers to that whole digital thing where we do projects involving artificial intelligence, machine learning, chatbots, digital forms. And very recently, we have introduced a new product, and which fits in with one of the trends we are seeing and that product is called Turbo Apps, and that enables low-code application development. So it enables people like you and me, this is what is termed by Gartner as a citizen developer, to build apps fast. So that's what we do. Just to summarize, web apps, mobile apps, and a low-code platform along with chatbots and AI ML.
Now, are you doing both on the platform and the enabling technology side to build applications? You talked about the Turbo Apps, but also some of the services to actually design and build the applications themselves?
Yes, absolutely. So we do provide strategy consulting where we will, listen to the requirements and then design the right solution, right? And then we develop the solution. We have the development team, and then of course we will train and make sure it's successful. So yeah, so we do provide services to build the applications, And again, we're not limited to our platform. We do have the digital platform, which is actually certified by SAP. We are an SAP partner, but we don't limit ourselves. So we can build apps without our platform or with our platform. The important thing is to satisfy the customer, to solve the customer's problem.
So talk a little bit about your customers. What are some of the industries you serve and the problems, as you said? What are the use cases that you're seeing more prominently of late?
Yes. So our industry verticals are very, very industrial. So our customers are in oil and gas, chemicals, mining, utilities, right? We don't do so much financial services retail.
Yep.
So hardcore industrial, chemicals, another vertical. So that's our vertical strength, right? CPG also. And what was your second part of the question?
Some of the use cases. So what are some of the problems that your customers are trying to solve with digital?
Yeah. So our strength and our use cases, the ones that we have implemented the most or mobilized the most, are in direct store delivery, and I think you guys have experience with that. So the guy or the gal going and selling Coke and beer and going to the stores, and so that whole process. So we mobilize that whole process of van sales, if you will. That's one area, direct store, mobile direct store delivery. Even a bigger strength for us is the asset management area, right? So, you have, so imagine you're on the oil rig, and I'm giving you a real example, right? So we have a customer in the oil and gas business in Canada and Houston. So they have the rig managers, and they have to inspect the equipment on the rig, maintain the equipment on the rig to make sure that the rig is up and running. So we build mobile apps for them that they're using on, for example, both iOS and Windows tablets. And the data that they collect, it integrates back with SAP, right? Because building an app without integration with backend systems in the enterprise really has no value. So those are some of the two biggest use cases. Again, mobile direct store delivery and mobile asset management.
And how long has Unvired been operating? When did you start it?
9 years ago. So we were incorporated in Texas in 2012.
Okay. And how did you get started? So talk a little bit, Alok, about your kind of personal journey, right? One of the things we call the show Frontline Innovators, right? And I think it's about, people inside and outside organizations who are trying to kind of drive innovation. But I also think it's helpful for the audience to understand what was your path to kind of get there, right? How did you get interested in this opportunity, in this space, right? How did you become CEO of Unvired?
Sure. So I came to the US to do my master's in chemical engineering. And so I do have a technical background. Then I after finishing that, I went to Texas A&M to got my MBA. And there I was very fortunate being in Houston, got a chance to work with the NASA Johnson Space Center to transfer technologies to the commercial sector, right? So that the taxpayer money was used wisely. So that's what got me interested. So met a lot of inventors at NASA here at JSC in Houston. And so that gave me the innovation invention bug, right? Because working about 3 years with these very smart people and seeing how those technologies can translate to actually commercial success was very interesting. And then I joined, the usual thing, consulting with KPMG. But my big break in tech, and this is what really led me, was I got a break to work with SAP, the big software company in California. So I spent some time in Silicon Valley. That even added more to the whole innovation fire, if you will, right? And then came back to Houston, and that's when some of us got together, and we saw that the trend towards mobile, and we were all SAP ex-SAP folks, so we banded together and formed Unwired in 2012.
Yeah, and what was the impetus to kind of focus on kind of frontline opportunities?
Well, serendipity, I guess. Our first customers were in this area of, they wanted to, I guess, think about 10 years ago when mobile was still in its infancy, the bang for the buck was for the field service worker, right? Not for the office worker. So I think it was natural that given that we were doing mobile, that field service opportunities came our way. We found an early success, and then we just kind of built on that.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, Alok. I don't know if you've noticed this, but having been in the mobile space for so long myself, is it seemed that, like you said, there was a big bang for the buck from a frontline worker standpoint when it came to kind of mobile. So those kind of first iterations of kind of mobile and digital solutions. And then it seemed there was a big shift toward kind of the knowledge worker base, right? And kind of the whole consumerization of IT and mobility. And now it seems like we're now at a second wave for the frontline, digitizing the frontline. It's almost like playing catch up again on the front line. So it's opened up a whole nother set of opportunities there.
Absolutely. And just to kind of add to that, so for example, one of the big extensions of the field service worker we are seeing is in the area of work permits, right? Yeah. So up till now, it was mobile apps for inspections and for maintenance. And now we are getting a lot of inquiries about, hey, can you digitize my work permit, which again is a part of the asset management process, right? Before you inspect or repair something, you have to make sure it's ready to operate, right? It's locked out and isolated and all that. So yeah, so now that mobilization is coming down to another use case, a big one is work permits. So from mobile app for inspections, maintenance, now on to work permits and safety forms. So it just keeps extending.
Yep. Yep. That's great. That's great. So Alok, what do you like to do outside of, I'm sure you don't spend all your time as a CEO. I'm sure you spend a lot of time, dealing with the business and with technology, but what are some of your passions outside of work?
Right. So I love to read, and especially when I was, in my younger days. So a big fan of English literature, the English poets, Keats, Wordsworth, and all that, and also, literature. John Steinbeck was one of my favorite authors. So reading, and then in sports, tennis is a big, passion of mine. I love Rafa Nadal, and before that, it used to be, Borg. But now Rafa, and then also cricket coming from India, cricket is also a sport that interests me greatly, and I still always compare it with baseball, because they are so similar.
Yeah, I'm sure you get to play more tennis than you do cricket these days, though, right?
That's true.
Here in Texas, right? So
that's true.
Yeah. And Rafa is one of my favorites to watch. He's just incredible. Hopefully he'll stay healthy. That's been his biggest issue. So.
Right.
So let's go back. I'd love to kind of dial this back. We've talked about a lot of things already. One of the things I'd love to kind of come back to is you talked about this greater awareness. When we talked about the challenges, you talked about the challenge of adoption and training. And it was very interesting. You've kind of made this distinction between there's training and there's change management. Right. So talk a little bit about, because a lot of times people associate them, kind of think about them both as one and the same. So how do you differentiate training from change management? What are the elements that it would incorporate change management, particularly as we're talking about digital solutions in the frontline workforce?
Right. So I think training really is a part of an overall change management plan. That's how we look at it. So if you think of change management, OCM, you're looking at starts with leadership, right? I mean, right from the CEO to the vice presidents, everybody has to be committed to something they're trying to change, right? The process. And that's why the digitalization is happening. So I think it starts from leadership. Very important component of change management is communication, right? To all stakeholders, right? To all your employees, to your, even to your maybe board members, investors, if the money spent is significant, and of course to the, even to your vendors, right? Communication has to be key. That's what we find, and then of course, the training angle to it extremely important. What we also find is, getting the buy-in from everybody upfront. And I think these are the key pillars of change management. Then, of course, there are some, if you can keep diving, but I think communication is probably the single most important thing that stands out rather. And of course, the training and the user adoption. How are we going to ensure the success? How do you measure the pre-project and the post-project, identifying those KPIs to make sure that you can then at the end of the project say, hey, this was a success, or what were the learnings. So I think those and I think that those KPIs come from the stakeholders, right? So I think you have to work with different stakeholders and to come up with a change management plan.
So it's very interesting. I mean, we hear this, we've heard this very often. We've been doing this change management series as part of the podcast, and the communication element obviously is a critical one. We've continued to hear that over and over. One of the things that is might be challenging, right, is that sometimes it's very hard to communicate with frontline workforces, right? They're in many ways they have been left behind when it comes to that core communication thing. And we've worked with customers who they don't even have email right on their devices, right? They've been given an app and it's like, this is the app and that's what you do, and there is very little way to kind of collaborate, communicate with them. What are some of the best practices you've seen, or how are companies trying to overcome that particular hurdle?
Yeah, so one of the things we are finding people, so yeah, you're right. A lot of people don't have emails. A lot of times the field service worker is actually a contractor to a company. And we're talking thousands of, especially in the oil and gas, people who are doing the inspections typically is contracted out. And so one of the ways we are doing is the mobile app really helps because you can send notifications. So we can use, the Apple and Google, notification platform to send notifications. That's one way we are communicating through text messaging for people who don't have email. I think and it really works out well, especially with the millennials. And I think we're all used to now text and notifications. So that's something when we build an app, customers are asking us, hey, can you email something and also send a push notification? So I think that push notification is extremely important. And also, I think what we are also pushing customers to more and more is, hey, let's go beyond the usual videos and documentation. Let's go with a training platform, right? You have a mobile platform to develop apps. How about a training platform? And that training platform typically has elements of chat, for example, right? And it's mobile first. So think about it. If a company, and maybe Skillful may have something there, if a company has a training platform and it has chat inbuilt, right? And it is, giving you access to videos and email also, and a way for communication. I think a good a next gen training platform could serve a valuable communication tool also.
Yeah, well, that was you mentioned Skillful, and our platform at Skillful is, you're absolutely right, is one of the things that we learned very quickly, as I said, because a lot of these frontline workers didn't have those capabilities already, right? They didn't have either collaboration tools or even email, that we had to build kind of notification capability directly into the platform, right? Because it became the only way to communicate with those users as well. So, yeah, I agree. Now, talk a little bit about, the from the frontline worker perspective. Obviously, you guys, that's exclusively who you're focused on, right? The industrial space and frontline workers. Talk a little bit about their frustrations, right? I mean, I think that's one of the things that when we implement new technology, it causes maybe frustration and anxiety for those workers. What have you observed in terms of what are the things that they are maybe fearful of when it comes to adopting new technology?
Yes, and especially in our industries, the field service worker is working in very, very critical environments, right? Think of an oil rig, right? If the rig goes down or if something blows up, people are going to die. So safety is extremely important. So there is, I think, a natural tendency to resist the move away from paper, right? Because they've been doing this and paper is always there. It can be filed, documented, it's there, right? You can see it. So I think that was one challenge that we found initially was how do we get these papers? And some of the people also in the oil rigs were of an older generation also. So there was some of it, though they adopted very well. But initially they were not, typically an oil rig with experience, you won't find a millennial doing it, right? So these people are not used to playing with mobile phones and texting and notifications. So I think there was some of that, just the demographics of the population. And secondly, the fact is, hey, I'm comfortable with paper, and how do I now? And if you want me to move, please enable me, make it easy for me. Make the big thing is user experience, the employee experience, the user experience. So I'll give you a real example. The first time we had designed an app, we were told that this has a little too, maybe a couple of too many screens, can reduce the number of fields. And this is years ago, right, when everything was new. And we quickly realized that the frontline worker has to do a lot of things in a compressed time in a highly stressful environment, right, in our industries. And so the app has to be very simple. The screens have to be lesser. The tabs have to be minimized. So the design of the application has to be beautiful. I mean, that word is used a lot when you talk about app design. So we quickly realized that it has to be a beautiful user experience, simplified user experience. I think that is the biggest challenge. And also when you add on new features, make sure there's a way to communicate. And so that the worker is aware that this is the new feature and how I use it. So is that constant training, if you will. That's another big challenge.
Yeah, I'd love to kind of come back to that as well. I do want to pick up on kind of the concept of designing, right? Improving that user experience for these workers. I mean, one of the things that, I would say that, listen, we have this tendency to think that, mobile applications are so simple and intuitive and anybody can just pick up a device and use it, is because that's what we've kind of become accustomed to when we pick up our iPhone or our Android device. And, they're very simple, intuitive apps, right? With fairly limited functionality. But when it comes to some of these use cases that you've described, right? I mean, there's a lot that goes into those applications. So, how do you strike the balance between, serving the needs of the business, right? Which, with a business with a big B, right? Which is, hey, I need my work, I need to capture all this information, right? I need to get them all this information, versus the needs of the user, right? Which is, how do we simplify? Talk about that, because I think it's probably a constant battle between, trying to strike a balance between those things.
Yes. So we focus, well, first we focus on the design, we talk about it, but then we do certain things that are abstracted from the user, so they don't have to worry. So for example, one of them is the way we handle offline, right? So let's say there's the user on the oil rig and connectivity is there, great, and suddenly they go to a part of the oil rig where there's bad connectivity, because this could be some place out wild west in Texas where connectivity is really bad. So the way we've done it is, the offline works is that, let's say the worker is doing their work, right? They can finish their work and not worry about it. And whenever they are back in a range where there's connectivity, the data, all the work they have done, the data they have put on their tablet or phone is synced up back to SAP or SharePoint directly, right? So we are taking away the complexity from them. They're not worried about, oh, am I online? Am I not online?
Yeah.
All those things. They have been told, here is the app, you've been trained, just do your work, don't worry about any other issue. Similarly, what we do is to enable data downloads fast, because that is another frustration. In one case, we are, as you said, we're talking of documents, right? And PNIDs and diagrams. And sometimes this can take, maybe more than a minute to download. That is frustrating for the user, as you know. More than 3 seconds, I myself turn away, right? Yeah. 3 or 4 seconds is the rule. So what we have done is, so we basically at the back end, we simplify the data transfer, we compact the data so that the data transfer happens in seconds, what would have taken a minute. So these are the things that we do that ensures that the user experience is simple, they don't get frustrated, but there are a lot of things that we are doing in the back end with our platform, right? So whether it's offline, whether it's compressing data, making times fast, response, things like that.
And how are you, so how do you kind of go through and test that user experience with workers themselves? Kind of what's the process that you guys take at Unvired?
Yeah, so at the enterprise, apps typically, you design, and there's a design phase, a blueprint phase, you develop the app, then we do our own integration testing, and then it comes to that user acceptance testing, UAT, right, where it's the customer. So typically what we find is customers will, identify maybe 10 early users, and they are given the app to play with, and they make sure that all the edge cases are also tested by these users. So it's that, and the feedback we get from the users, from the customer users during the UAT period, we take it back, and there are always some bugs in software initially. We tweak that, and some frequently people come up with some minor enhancements, right? Also major, but but we like to limit. The customer wants to limit it to minor enhancements. So typically we get the minor enhancements, we iron out the bugs, and then typically this lasts about maybe 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the complexity of the app, and then the app goes into production or live.
Yep. The other thing you mentioned that I wanted to come back to was this concept. You made a mention of, when you're adding new features, updating new features, the ability to communicate with users, make sure they're aware of it, make sure they're trained on those. One of the things that I've observed is, I think companies, have historically been reluctant, particularly in the enterprise space, particularly in the industrial enterprise space, to make changes to applications, right? There was this kind of notion, we're going to build it, we're going to put it out there, it's going to live for several years, we're not even going to touch it. Has that changed? Have you seen that change? Are companies now moving toward faster iteration? I mean, certainly we've seen that trend overall in enterprise, but as I said, I think in this segment, it seems to have been lagging. Are you seeing that change now?
Yes, especially in our world of mobile apps. Yeah, absolutely. So, customers are basically wanting to do it in iterative steps, iterations. Let's get the first one out there. And we're not talking 6-month projects. Typically, we're talking 2-month mobile application projects, the first phase, and then maybe an incremental phase of 2 weeks. But yeah, it's like let's go to market very, very quickly, definitely.
So that adds that additional level of complexity to the change management element as well. I mean, how have you seen companies adapt to that?
So I think typically what we find is companies are, take the train-the-trainer approach, right? So they identify a super user, if you will, and that is also how they have also done with other apps, right? So, and then these super users get trained, and they become the voice of their, the larger employee base, and that's how they kind of roll out the applications. We take a, a super user or train-the-trainer approach.
Yeah, yeah. Are you seeing customers looking? You kind of mentioned, training platforms, technology, you made mention of earlier is like, hey, you're using mobile applications. You should be thinking about mobile kind of training tools and platforms. Are you seeing a shift to that? Or companies becoming more aware of the availability of those kind of tools?
They are beginning to get aware, right? I think they are beginning to express a need for the change management, and they want us to give a detailed user adoption training plan. So they know that's very important, right? But I think we still need to educate them about, hey, that if you were to use a training platform, yes, there would be some initial upfront cost like everything else, right? Some content building, maybe some cost for the platform. But we like to sit down and tell them, listen, look at the pros and cons, the cost benefit, and you should really look at training platforms and not just rely on because it's not sustainable. Making videos, making documentation is fine if the app would never change, right? But the reality is, the very next month, people want enhancement, it changes. So you need a living platform, if you will, and that's what we are telling our customers.
Yeah, and it's not, on the one side you've got the technology is changing. The other side, you've got the workforce is constantly changing, as you mentioned, with the high turnover. You talk a little bit about the turnover and onboarding, and and you also mentioned contractors, right? So companies are often supplementing their own workforce with contractors. How are companies kind of dealing with that onboarding issue?
Yes, so let's look at the contractor piece first, the onboarding, right? So I don't know, this question can be answered in various ways. So one of the onboarding ways customers handle contractors differently from employees is the authentication, right? Yeah. So if you're an employee, you're typically authenticated against Active Directory, right? Or because they all have a company account. If you're with contractors, we find it's email IDs and passwords being used. So again, from an onboarding perspective, it all starts with a different authentication process, right? How, as far as usage of the application also is different, because enterprises can tell their employees to download a mobile app, right? Hey, we've got this great app developed for you, download it, whether it's through that public store, private store, but hey, we want the app on your phone, right? So that's how you distribute the app. When it comes to contractors, especially with the oil and gas, you're maybe looking at 500 contractors, 500 or even 1,000 contractors you're not going to tell them download the app, because the contractor could be working for you today, maybe not tomorrow. And so how do you then give them the app? So with that, we give them a URL, a link. And so they use the app using a URL link versus the employee who's using a downloaded mobile app. So there's those are some differences in onboarding, if you will, from a onboarding process, right? I don't know if that just gives you a flavor of how it's deployed differently, for example.
Yep. So I want to talk about things you've seen that companies have done when we talk about digital transformation. Again, companies often have a very hopeful view of what the technology can do for their organization. And we've talked a lot about change management and how that impacts the success or failure. So maybe take us through, what have you seen as what are the best practices or elements of a successful deployment? Right, you talked about the challenge of deployment and change management. What are kind of, or more importantly, what are kind of the things that you've seen that say, hey, if you do this, I could see it coming, it's going to lead to failure?
Yeah, so I think a few points stand out, right? First of all, we have found that projects that are really successful are when we have an executive sponsor on the customer side. Somebody is vested in the success of the project, right? And so they nominate a project manager there, and we have communication is always the key. We have weekly meetings. Anything which is kind of maybe going off track is identified and flagged early, and it's all because of that communication, right? There is trust between the customers are looking at the vendor as more as a partner, right? Than just, hey, I gave you these specs and here's the money and you build it. So I think that relationship with the vendor really is very, it really impacts the success of any project. So I think, and then of course, do you have the right elements in place, right? Did somebody up front think about, hey, yeah, this app is good, but who are the users, right? The audience. What is their skill level, and how are they going to be trained, right? And has anybody thought of a change management plan, right? Are we going to communicate why are we doing this, right? And then how are we doing this? How will we measure the success? So I think companies that do all of this, we find that our projects are more successful.
And when you've seen them go awry, what's kind of been the number one, number two factor that has kind of led to, unsuccessful initiatives?
I think the biggest thing is when the field worker stops using the app.
Yeah.
Then it really goes south. And there can be many reasons why they don't use the app, right? It could be that their experience is really bad. The app was not designed well, or it was designed well, but their input was not taken, right? So the app was designed beautifully, but the requirement was given maybe from a desk worker, from an office worker, right? Who thought they knew the requirements. The field worker wasn't really involved. I think that's where the biggest thing is, when there is a gap between the app delivered and the expectations of the end user, the field worker.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about there's all these links in the chain, right, that need to be put together to ensure successful deployment and that user adoption, right? The frontline worker, that's the last link in the chain. But if that one, just like any other link in the chain, fails, the whole thing collapses. So I think that's a great point. And I think you just raised a good issue is, this is kind of ultimately why one of the reasons when we kind of created Skillful is we had heard from customers that they had no idea. First of all, some of them just didn't even have an idea of what adoption looked like for their frontline workers. And then some of them discovered, like you said, that, well, they're not using, right? Or 50% are using it, or they're not using it consistently. But the big issue is they had no idea why. Right. So, determining that, like you said, is it a user experience issue? Was it not communicated correctly? Were they not trained effectively? I think that's a great point. So this has been a great discussion. I want to wrap this up a little bit by asking you kind of a bit of a fun question. So first of all, Alok, I found it fascinating that you went to school initially for chemical engineering and you spent your entire career in technology. It's very similar. I went to school for English and economics, and like you, studied the English Romantic poets, and I've spent my entire career in technology. It's funny how that works out that way. But one of the things I like to ask is, you've been in technology for a long time now. What is it that you love about working in technology, and what is it that you hate about it, or like less? Let's put it that way.
So the one thing that I love most about technology is that we are solving problems of customers, right? And it's intellectually stimulating because you're solving problems, and also very gratifying because at the end of the day somebody's happy and they say, hey, great guys, great job Unwired, look, you've made my sales team more effective, or made my inspection processes safer, right? And we get those emails, right, frequently, so that's the one thing that really drives me and makes me happy is customer success, and also at the same time our employee growth, because when we deliver these projects, frequently we have to read and learn, right? The technology changes so fast, and so we are keeping up with the new frameworks coming up, the mobile development, whether it's on the back end integration technologies, and so SAP is bringing out new stuff all the time. So it's the employee learning and development and the customer delight that's really fuels me.
And what frustrates you on the flip side of that?
What frustrates me is, yes, sometimes I think that the pace of digital could even be faster, right? Because we talk to customers and I think this is no secret. Sometimes things get bogged down between the business and IT.
Yeah.
And I've seen that, that slows things down, right? Instead of everybody marching to the same sheet of music, people are kind of, pulling a little bit apart. And so that's sometimes, but I think that's even true in a family. But that's something I wish that the different stakeholders could come closer and align with the company vision and execute digital fast.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting, particularly on the vendor side. When you're on the vendor side, right, you're very much focused on, yeah, we can get it done. And I've always found is like, we've always had that question is, in the past is, well, how fast can you move? It's like, we can move as fast as you guys can, right? That's not the issue, right? We can deliver as fast as you want us to. So that's great. Alok, this has been a wonderful discussion. So just, I want to kind of let folks know where they can find you. LinkedIn, Alok Pant, that's the best place to kind of reach you if folks want to learn more about Unvired, learn more about you, talk to you about their upcoming initiatives. Is that a good place to get you?
Yes, LinkedIn is the best place. I'm on it every day. Yep.
And the company website is Unvired, UNVIRED.com. Yep. And they can also check out your product, ChimeBot, there as well.
Yep.
So Alok, I really want to thank you for coming on the program. This has been a great discussion. Obviously, you really care about not only the technology, but serving the needs of this workforce that this whole program is about. So thanks for your insights today. And I'm sure our guests are going to love listening to it. So thanks again.
Gene, thank you for having me. Really enjoyed our conversation and looking forward to some more conversations down the road.
Yeah, exactly. So for those listening, I hope you found this conversation as enjoyable as I have. If so, please share and rate the podcast. 5-star ratings help ensure that it gets promoted to other professionals like you that are innovating on the front lines. And a friendly reminder, this podcast is sponsored by Skillful, the mobile digital adoption for deskless and frontline workers. You can visit the Skillful website at skyllful.com. And if you or someone you know is out there innovating on the front lines, we'd love to hear about it. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn and share your story. See you on our next episode.